believe there were six events for Donald Trump at the time, and you are correct, they were pre-convention events. At least the two that I attended were. Any questions from members of the committee? You made some very good points. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'm struggling with Bobby's last name.
Robbie. Just call me Robbie.
Okay, Robbie, there you are.
Do not worry.
I like that hat.
Like the uniform?
Well, I'm a former scout, but I especially like the hat coming from the Hat City.
As you can see, I'm a scout. I did make Eagle. I'm now, for time being, I was an assistant scoutmaster. I am fully trained to be an assistant scoutmaster. Right now, I'm just doing sort of background stuff because, for a variety of reasons. But today, I'm coming primarily as a good student of history. Now, let's make something clear. I said a student of history. I'm not saying a history professor or anything like that. Just a student of history. And to bring up the results of the 5 times that we had a discrepancy in the national popular vote. Every time that happens, we always pick the wrong one, according to what history would happen. Starting back in 1824, we observed, although I personally don't like him, a dynamic president. Now I should say dynamic. I'm not going to say a good president. A dynamic president, Andrew Jackson, over a, you could say, wishy-washy president, John Quincy Adams. I'm going to do this a little bit out of order. In 1888, obviously we elect Benjamin Harrison, which has been brought up previously, but that ultimately led to the Panic of 1893, which was effectively a depression. It was on par with the Great Depression, although not as long. It was nowhere near as long. In 2000, we obviously elected George W. Bush over Al Gore, who, although may have been the right president for September 11th, maybe not, he ultimately wanted to get us involved back in Iraq, which he did, and furthermore, it led to the recession of 2008. In 2016, we effectively elected Hitler 2.0. Donald Trump used the exact same tactics, albeit different minorities, that Hitler used in 1933, and how he legally came to power. He used the Weimar Republic to enable his rise to power. And that's exactly what Trump did. He used the Electoral College to enable his rise to power. And this has been brought up before, but the last one, of course, was 1876, which has been brought up before and led to Jim Crow. Any questions?
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you for your patience today and being another friend of history. I appreciated your interest in that. Questions from members of the committee? Thank you. Thank you for your advocacy today. I assume you're in support of the national popular vote.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Next up is Gerald Lentini. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your endurance. Thank you, Senator, Representative Fox, Representative Devlin, and members of the committee. I'm an elections attorney from Manchester, and I am here today to urge you to support HB 5421, which would join our state in the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. In short, the NPV is a more democratic and egalitarian mechanism for rewarding electors. It is sensible, intuitive, constitutional, consistent with our Republican form of government, and promotes the idea that the president should have popular legitimacy in addition to institutional legitimacy. There are over 500,000 elected officials in the United States. Of those, only one, the President of the United States, is elected through a system where voters lack a uniform voting power. Making every vote count equally, which NPV does, is a welcome step. To respond to a point that Representative Sampson raised earlier with Secretary Merrill, as a voter in Connecticut, I would rather my vote for president be counted equally with every other presidential voters than have it count only within our limited political community. NPV makes that happen. Our interests as a state are still protected under NPV. Our citizens still take our state's peculiar interest into account when they're voting. Our state will still be administering our elections. In the event that no candidate receives a majority of electoral votes, which is still possible under NPV, since not all electors are bound to vote for a particular candidate, our state's congressional delegation will still be there to defend our interests should the choice of a president devolve to Congress. Some mistakenly believe that NPV would put control of presidential elections in the hands of only the most populous states and cities. This is incorrect for several reasons. First, under NPV, voting blocks such as regions or constituency groups, not residents of a particular state, would be most important for campaigns. Second, even if every voter in the 5 most populous states all supported the exact same candidate, you still would not have a majority of American presidential voters. Third, as a practical matter, presidential campaigns want to get the most votes for their money, so they would likely pursue voters in affordable media markets such as Hartford instead of more expensive ones like New York and Los Angeles. For a presidential campaign under NPV, it's more cost-effective to look to small and mid-sized communities instead of banking everything on major urban centers. Lastly, NPV does not violate the Constitution's prohibition on interstate compacts. The Supreme Court settled this back in the 19th century in the case of Virginia v. Tennessee. The court held there that the Compacts Clause only applies to arrangements that may encroach upon or interfere with the just supremacy of the United States. Since this legislature is explicitly empowered in the first section of Article 2 to choose the manner in which our electors shall be appointed, NPV does not encroach on federal power, and thus does not trigger the Compact Clause of Article 1, Section 10. We've changed how our elections are conducted countless times throughout our history, and almost always to increase their democratic nature. I urge you to do it again by passing the NPV. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Attorney Lentini, for your patience today. Questions from members of the committee? Chairman Fox.
Thank you, Chairman McLaughlin. Good to see you again, Gerald.
You as well.
Quick question. One I've asked other individuals who testified on this this bill today. Can you please give me your opinion? Are we getting rid of the Electoral College?
No, as both a legal matter and as a practical matter, we are not getting rid of the Electoral College here. As I mentioned, the electors would still be an integral part of the presidential selection process. We would still be choosing electors from a slate. We would still have the campaigns nominate the people they wish to serve as electors, and those electors would still have to cast their ballots here in Hartford to be counted in Washington, D.C. In point of fact, the more damaging to the Electoral College step that this legislature has already taken, along with many others, is to bind electors to vote for a particular candidate. That process eliminated one of the key arguments for the Electoral College, which was that as a collection of wizened leaders, they would be best suited to choose who would be a good fit for President of the United States. This state, along with, I believe, 28 other jurisdictions, has a legal requirement that our electors vote for the candidate to whom they were pledged. That right there is, I believe, a greater encroachment on the Electoral College than anything NPV promotes.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, one more question. Your last response stated, you stated we will still be choosing the electors.
Yes.
Can the argument be made that we would be handing over some of that authority to other citizens of other states?
So the electors themselves who would be chosen by the presidential campaigns and the state party as they currently are. So the slate for the Democrats, for example, would include Representative Godfrey and to be perfectly honest, I don't know if anyone here can name another elector off the top of their head, and I've spotted you one. So we would still be choosing who those electors would be. The question would be which slate, the Republican or the Democratic or any other party's slate, would be entitled to cast Connecticut's electoral votes. The choice of which slate that would be would no longer rest solely with Connecticut's voters. It would rest with all of America's voters under the compact. Part of the character of an interstate compact is that we create a new political community. And what would be happening under NPV is that we would be creating a community of at least 270 electoral votes that agrees to abide by the majority national vote.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Fox. Representative Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony and for your stamina in joining us today. This is the great thing about this committee. We go we go on and on. But there's very passionate issues, and I appreciate your passion for this and coming here today. You've, and asked the question, does this eliminate the Electoral College? You very clearly say no. But what we've heard over and over from testimony, it really makes the Electoral College irrelevant.
I disagree. The Electoral College is still a necessary part of the presidential selection process under NPV, and should a candidate fail to obtain a majority of electors, which is still possible under NPV, then the Congress would have to choose from the leading electoral vote getters to select a president and vice president.
So how would it be possible? Because again, if the national popular vote, right, individual voters votes for a particular candidate, whatever that majority is, other states have to cast their electors for them. So we've used this example multiple times. Connecticut may not align with the national popular vote candidate, but sorry, your electors are going that way.
Respectfully, you've conflated two steps in the process. The step of choosing the slate of electors who get to cast electoral votes, and then the casting of those votes themselves. So if Connecticut were to choose a Democratic slate of electors, but one of those electors decided that he or she did not like the Democratic nominee, they could cast their electoral vote for somebody else. This would be a violation of Connecticut state law, but I believe the penalty is a misdemeanor with a small fine attached to it, and I have questions about the constitutionality of that anyway under the Powell v. McCormick precedent. So the National Popular Vote Plan would decide who the electors are, but those electors still have their independent agency as electors. So they're making the decision themselves, irrespective of the national will. It's just choosing which slate gets to make their electoral vote.
And your thought about the, under this scenario, how is the minority voice really represented?
Well, I have a difficult time with this question because it's assuming that the people who are the numerical minority in an election are entitled to a win. As it happens now in Connecticut, if the majority of Connecticut's voters side with, and just going off of history here, the Democratic slate, then the Democratic electors will meet here in Hartford and will cast their ballot, and the Republican voters in this state have effectively had no say in choosing that, except to contest in this local election, in this state election. There's no more, there's no greater disregard of a voter who does not win the majority under NPV than there is under the current system. What you do have is greater competitiveness in states that are otherwise ignored. So for example, here in Connecticut, a Republican's vote matters as much as a Republican's vote in a swing state or a red state. So the candidates have an incentive to reach out to voters here in Connecticut and to try to drive Republican turnout here, which you may appreciate as a state representative will have effects up and down the ballot. Somebody who's turned out to vote for the Republican in a presidential election is likely to also vote for the Republican
We had
in the state legislature.
77% voter turnout in the state of Connecticut.
Yes, we are an exceptionally wealthy and well-educated state relative to the others. There are states that are unfortunately not as lucky as Connecticut is to have a population that's as civically engaged. I, as an American, want to make sure that all Americans who are voting for president are given the same opportunities to participate, and that states where you don't have the natural affinity for the democratic process will have that extra incentive.
understanding that the Electoral College system that was put in place wasn't just a mistake or an oversight, but a very thoughtful process to ensure that the election of the President of the United States was done by each individual state different than the way all other elections are handled.
Again, respectfully, I can't agree that it wasn't a mistake because it didn't take until the 8th Congress for them to have to fundamentally rework how the Electoral College system functioned. The original system was not designed to encourage faction or to deal with the concept of competing factions within the same party, which is how we ended up with the vituperation between President Jefferson and Vice President Burr. The electoral system failed in its 4th election and had to be fundamentally reconfigured in the 12th Amendment. Now, you can make the argument that that's a good precedent for an amendments-based process, and as somebody who personally does want to abolish the Electoral College, I'm all for an amendment to abolish the Electoral College, but that's not necessary for the National Popular Vote Plan to come into place, and I consider this a good step in the interim.
Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you for being with us tonight.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Mr.
Thank you, Representative Devlin. Other questions from members of the committee? Representative Winkler.
We've heard several times that the national popular vote would circumvent the Electoral College. Is that the way you see it?
It's not. I see this as a way of changing the nature of selecting electors, which we have done as others have testified countless times, and which we have different systems throughout the country, including in Maine and Nebraska for how they do that. And Senator Linares' bill here in Connecticut has suggested a different system here as well. There's no inherent tension between choosing a national popular vote to select our slate of electors and the idea of an electoral college. It's just a different way of picking a winner.
You're an attorney.
I am, sir.
I'm not going to ask you your areas of expertise, but I would like to know if you have an opinion on whether the national popular vote, if the compact goes into effect, could pass muster at the Supreme Court.
To answer the question you conspicuously didn't ask, I am an elections attorney. I do campaign finance, voting rights, and election administration law primarily. Yes, I do believe that this would pass muster at the Supreme Court. As I mentioned, there is a precedent that is closely on point here, Virginia v. Tennessee. In that case, I believe it was 1894, Justice Field held that the only interstate compacts which are prohibited under Article 1, Section 10 are those which tend to aggrandize state power and diminish federal power. This doesn't do that because this is a plenary power of the states themselves under Article 2, Section 1 to choose how we pick our electors. With regard to the comments you made to the previous witness about the litigation that David Boies is putting through, his theory is based on an equal protection challenge from the 14th Amendment, saying that the 14th Amendment modifies how Article 2, Section 1 operates, so that whereas under Article 2, Section 1 is originally envisioned, the states could have limited electors to the person who was supported by white males or property owners or just male voters. Subsequent amendments to the Constitution have restricted that ability of the states. His argument is that winner take all is also restricted by the Equal Protection Clause. It's a novel legal theory. I'm not banking on him winning. I don't actually think he's going to, but it's a very interesting argument he's making. In terms of how I think the Supreme Court would act here, I don't. I think the Supreme Court would decline this case on the grounds that this is basically a settled precedent. There's no active controversy here in that we've already covered whether or not interstate compacts of this nature should trigger Article 1, Section 10's prohibition.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Other questions from members of the committee? Thank you, Attorney Lentini.
My pleasure. Thank you, Senator.
Very good input. Very good input. David Sutherland. John McClellan. Margaret Miner. Forgive my mispronunciation. Madhav Vishnubhata. And once again, Nandish Nuchina. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nandish Nucino from Windsor. Give me 1 second, I gotta pull up my notes.
Missing
Oh, I-
a page.
Oh, I'd like to say the 77% turnout figure includes only registered voters. If you include all people who are eligible to vote but not necessarily registered, the figure for turnout is lower.
Okay.
Let's see here. So, I have a few brief comments in support of HB 421. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but after I heard Tara Ross's testimony, I thought, why not? I'm a little bit nervous, not used to speaking in public, especially in such a distinguished and austere environment, although there's less people here now, so maybe it won't be so bad. I commend all the people who spoke before me. I was amazed, frankly, at their eloquence and erudition. They definitely have made my speaking here superfluous at best. The founding fathers were incredibly smart and wise people doing their best within the confines of the world that existed at the time. But, you know, they didn't let women vote. They didn't let senators get elected directly by the general population. So we've changed a lot of things since they started the country. Life is a lot different now than in the 1700s. It used to be that geographic barriers made a particular state's culture very distinctive, but now movement between states is much easier. Doesn't take 3 months in a wagon train to go from Connecticut to Oregon anymore. Whenever you're talking about changes, you know, things are always a little bit uncertain. No system is perfect. There's always positives and negatives to how you choose to organize a society. Our Constitution and the government it provided was a chance that our founding fathers took, and many people at the time doubted whether our country would survive, but history has proven our founding fathers correct through the strength and resilience of our great nation during its almost 250 years of existence. So I advocate for Connecticut to push history forward again. The National Popular Vote Compact is a clever, appropriate, and legal workaround to the Electoral College, and I fully support it. There's also the thought that states could apportion electors proportionally instead of our current winner-take-all system. That could be a good next step for America. Still, I urge the Connecticut House of Reps to support and pass the National Popular Vote Compact because it would make our country more modern, more fair, more democratic, and would in the end promote a more just method for us to elect our leaders. And I'd like to end by saying I realized a few minutes ago that I only paid for 2 hours of parking. So I might be seeing a ticket when I get back to my car. If any of you Congress people can validate my parking, that would be amazing. But all right, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we don't have a stamp to validate parking.
It's too bad.
And I wish you well. Hopefully there's no ticket and that's not a problem. You did a fine job, not intending to do so. And you did make a comment, I believe you said that the proposal is a clever workaround of the Electoral College. And frankly, I say the same. I don't agree with what it is, but it is a clever workaround.
But I think it's legal. I think it definitely is legal. Like the attorney before me, he said it would pass constitutional muster, and I definitely agree with that. I don't think the Supreme Court would have any issues with this compact.
Thank you. And you said what prompted you to speak when you had not intended to. I think it's interesting that you stayed all day with the intention of listening.
Well, I didn't know it was going to take all day, but you know, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Yeah, once you get reeled in, you can't get out, right? So, but you spent all day listening, and you said that you were motivated to speak because of the testimony of Tara Ross, who's written several books on the topic. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, what did she say that motivated you?
Well, see, I'm an attorney myself, and so I've heard many attorneys use very impressive language to put forward their arguments. And what I thought was interesting is that a lot of people who are against the National Popular Vote Compact would say that it's going to lead to mob rule and emotional decisions, and that was the reason why the Electoral College was implemented in the first place. But a lot of people who don't support the compact, with their arguments and their deference to the founding fathers, I almost feel like they have more of an emotional attachment and emotional arguments rather than using logic and reason in making their arguments.
Well, I must admit, I represent Sherman, Connecticut, named in honor of Roger Sherman, who you probably know was the only person to sign all 4 founding documents. So I do have an affinity to the founding fathers and the Constitutional Convention, and frankly, that's why I honor the Electoral College.
I do too. I think they did an amazing job with at the time it's really a brilliant design for government. And I once took a comparative constitutional law class, and I was amazed at how other countries, they may have made some changes, but a lot of them have followed our Constitution.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. We've completed the list of people who have signed up.
No, I missed my testimony and came back.
Okay. So we've completed the list that I have in front of me that have signed up. Are there any others who would like to speak?
I would like to.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for your patience. Senator McLaughlin, Senator Flexer, Representative Fox. My name's Tom Swan. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Citizen Action Group. I want to start by taking offense to an earlier insult directed towards Senator McLaughlin. When Tara Ross earlier said that we could blame all of our problems on Trump primary voters, I think that our problems run deeper and wider than just the people who voted for Donald Trump in the primary last year. CCAG supports the National Popular Vote Compact because we believe in the principle of one person, one vote. Throughout the history of our country, we've had to make improvements upon what was a flawed document, the Constitution. We've had to make sure women could vote, that slaves weren't counted as only 3/5 of a person, that 18-year-olds could vote. We passed the voting rights. We passed a constitutional amendment to change the 12th Amendment. We passed a constitutional amendment to allow for the direct election of U.S. senators. We've had to make many changes, whether they be legislatively, popular movements, or through constitutional amendments throughout history. This is clearly an example where they could not anticipate how connected we could be with people in California or Hawaii today compared to then when they couldn't even do it from one side of a state to another. The principle of one person, one vote is what we should be all about, and this compact moves us forward on that. There's several other bills I'd like to comment on. I think that House Bill 5526, an act concerning dark money and disclosure, has become even more urgent today with the findings about Facebook and Cambridge Analytics and the undermining of our democracy and feeding people false information and how it goes. The additional one, because I'm trying to get out of here quicker for you all, the proposal to eliminate the Citizens Election Program is a cynical ploy for political advantage. It is craven to its roots. How can you change the process this soon before an election? We have saved more money because of this program just from not building another training school in Middletown. It's a bad bill. It'll only strengthen the Koch brothers and their interest. It ought to die. It's an insult that it came before this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swan. Thank you for your persistence. I knew you were waiting to testify, and I forgot. Just as you stood up, I spotted you. So thank you for your
Yeah, I'm
comments.
sorry I had to go. I had to take my daughter to dance class, and I've got a 6-week at home, so I really had to do a 6-week-old at home, so I really had to do that in order to make sure that the 6-week-old didn't have to go out
Being a
twice
dad
in
is a
day.
priority. God bless you.
So-
That's a beautiful thing. And thank you for all the good work CCAG does. I even agree on many occasions. And are there any questions from members of the committee? Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
kindly. Are there other members of the audience that would like to testify that did not previously sign up? Okay. Having heard none, then, our next committee meeting is Wednesday, March 21st. That time will be 30 minutes after the last session of the House or Senate. Time has yet to be determined. So Wednesday, the 21st, 30 minutes after the last session. And this public hearing is adjourned. Thank you all very much.